Welcome, dear listeners, to a magical tale that will guide you into a peaceful sleep. Tonight, we follow Seraphina, a curious child from Eldermoor, who discovers a mysterious dragon scale in the enchanted woods. As she embarks on an adventure with her friend Pippin, the squirrel, they uncover secrets that lead them into a world of wonder. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the soothing sounds of this story carry you into sweet dreams. Let's begin our journey. It was a morning like any other in the village of Eldermoor. The dew still clung to the grass, shimmering under the first rays of sunlight, and the soft hum of the forest buzzed in the background. Seraphina, a curious child with a mind full of wonder, had wandered to the edge of the enchanted woods, as she often did. Her mother had warned her not to stray too far, but there was something irresistible about the ancient trees, their towering forms whispering secrets to those who dared to listen. Today, however, something felt different. The air seemed alive, crackling with a quiet energy that prickled at her skin. Seraphina knelt by a brook where wildflowers grew in abundance, their colours so bright they seemed to glow. She reached out to pick a particularly vibrant bloom when her hand brushed against something cold and hard. Curious, she pushed aside the flowers, her heart quickening as her fingers closed around a smooth, iridescent object. It was a scale, large, almost the size of her palm, and shimmering in hues of gold and emerald. As Seraphina turned it over in her hand, the sunlight caught its surface, casting a rainbow of colours across the ground. She had heard stories of dragons, of course, old tales told around the hearth during winter nights. But dragons hadn't been seen in Eldermoor, or anywhere in the realm, for centuries. Some said they had vanished into the mountains, others claimed they were merely myths. Yet, here in her hand was a dragon scale. Seraphina's heart raced with excitement. She slipped the scale into her pocket and stood, her mind swirling with questions. Who had lost this? Was it really from a dragon? As she pondered these mysteries, the forest suddenly grew silent. The birds that had been chirping moments before fell into an eerie hush, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Hello," Seraphina called, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the treetops, the underbrush, but no one answered. Just as she turned to leave, a rustling sound came from the bushes behind her. She spun around, her breath caught in her throat. A small, twitching nose emerged from the undergrowth, followed by a bushy tail. It was a squirrel, but not just any squirrel. Pippin, the village troublemaker, known for his habit of stealing shiny trinkets. Pippin scurried toward her, chattering animatedly. Normally, Seraphina couldn't understand a word he said. But today, something strange happened. His words were clear, like a voice in her mind. "You found it!" Pippin exclaimed, his tiny paws waving in the air. "The dragon's scale! Oh, this is bad, very bad." Seraphina blinked, frozen in place. Did you just speak to me?" "Of course I did," Pippin snapped, hopping onto a nearby log. "That scale you're holding, it's not just a pretty trinket. It's from the dragon, the one who keeps the balance of magic in these lands. Now that you've touched it, the magic's awakened." Seraphina's head spun. Talking animals? Magic scales? This couldn't be real. She pinched herself to see if she was dreaming, but the sharp pain confirmed her worst suspicions. This was happening. I didn't mean to take it," she stammered, pulling the scale from her pocket and holding it out. "Here, you can have it." Pippin shook his head furiously. "It doesn't work that way, girl. You've bonded with it now. You're the one who must return it to its rightful place." "Rightful place? "Where is that?" Seraphina asked, her voice trembling. Pippin's eyes darkened. "With the dragon, of course. And that's not the easiest task. You see, the dragon has been gone for a long time. Finding him will be dangerous, especially now that others will sense the scale's power." Seraphina felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Others?" Pippin sighed. "Dark creatures, greedy for magic. They'll come for you soon enough. That scale is more powerful than you can imagine." Seraphina stared at the scale in her hand, feeling its weight grow heavier by the second. She had only wanted a day of adventure by the brook, but now it seemed fate had something far greater in store for her. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "Most don't," Pippin replied softly. "But the forest has chosen you, and now you must answer its call." With a sigh, Seraphina tucked the scale back into her pocket. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. Seraphina's mind raced as she followed Pippin through the thick underbrush of the enchanted forest. The trees seemed to lean in, their ancient branches creaking and groaning, as if they too were whispering secrets about the scale she now carried. Every so often, a creature would dart across their path: a rabbit, a fox, even a sleek black cat, and each one would pause to watch her with unnerving intensity. It wasn't just her imagination. The animals knew. They could sense the magic radiating from the dragon's scale, a magic that pulsed like a heartbeat in her pocket. And though Seraphina still marveled at the idea of being able to understand them, the weight of what Pippin had told her filled her with a growing unease. "I still don't understand why I'm the one who has to do this," she muttered, pushing aside a low-hanging branch as they walked. "Surely there's someone better suited for this task." Pippin scurried up a rock, turning to face her with a twitch of his nose. "The scale chose you, Seraphina. There's a bond now, like I said, and once the magic is awakened, it can't be undone. The animals of the forest sense it. They trust you to return the scale to its rightful place." Seraphina sighed. "But I don't even know where to start. How am I supposed to find a dragon that's been missing for centuries?" Pippin looked thoughtful, his tiny paws resting on his whiskered face. "There are those who might know more than us. The creatures who dwell deeper in the forest have lived longer than most of us. Some even remember the days when the dragon ruled these lands. But be warned, Seraphina, not all who know of the dragon are kind." Before she could ask what he meant, a sudden rustle in the trees above made them both freeze. Seraphina glanced upward, her heart pounding, but saw nothing but the shifting leaves in the breeze. Then, without warning, a voice echoed down from the treetops, a high-pitched, melodic tone that seemed to carry on the wind. "Ooh, what do we have here? A little human with a shiny, shiny treasure." Seraphina squinted into the branches, catching a glimpse of something flitting between the leaves. The light shifted, and suddenly a group of tiny figures appeared, their wings shimmering like stained glass in the sunlight. Fairies. They were as mischievous as the story said, their laughter like the tinkling of bells. The leader, a particularly radiant fairy with bright pink wings, hovered just out of Seraphina's reach, her eyes fixed on the scale. "Such a lovely thing you have there," the fairy purred, her smile sharp. "Perhaps you'd like to trade it for something better." Seraphina instinctively tightened her grip around the scale in her pocket. "I can't. I need to return it to the dragon." The fairies burst into laughter, their wings flickering with iridescent light as they danced through the air. The dragon? Oh child, that old tale again. Dragons are nothing but legends now, forgotten by the world. Surely you'd rather give the scale to someone who can actually use it. Pippin growled low in his throat, stepping in front of Seraphina. We don't have time for games, fairy. Leave us be. But the fairies only giggled louder, circling above them. Oh, but you misunderstand, little squirrel. We don't want the scale for ourselves. No. We want to help the girl. The dragon is real, but he's far, far away. And getting to him, well, that's where things get tricky. Seraphina's curiosity piqued. What do you mean? The leader fluttered closer, her eyes gleaming. There is one in this forest who knows the way to the dragon. An ancient creature, older than the trees themselves. The guardian of the forest. But finding him is not easy. He doesn't show himself to just anyone. How do I find him? Seraphina asked, her voice steady despite her unease. The fairy tilted her head, considering. Perhaps we could show you the path, but only if you make us a promise. Pippin's tail twitched nervously. Careful, Seraphina. Fairies don't make deals without tricks. But Seraphina felt the weight of the scale in her pocket, the magic humming softly. She knew this was her only lead, her only way forward. She took a deep breath and met the fairy's gaze. What's the promise? The fairy smiled, her wings shimmering as she spoke. If you meet the guardian, you must return to us with his answer. Tell us what he says, word for word. Seraphina hesitated, sensing there was more to this request than met the eye. But she had no choice. If the guardian was the only one who could help her find the dragon, she would have to take the risk. I promise, she said at last. The fairy's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, and with a flick of her wrist, she sent a trail of glowing light spiraling through the trees. Follow the light, child, and it will lead you to the guardian. But remember your promise, for fairies do not forget. With that, the fairies disappeared into the trees, their laughter fading into the wind. Seraphina watched the glowing trail as it weaved deeper into the forest, feeling both hope and dread rise within her. Let's go, she whispered to Pippin, and together they stepped onto the path of light, ready to face whatever awaited them ahead. The forest grew darker as Seraphina and Pippin followed the shimmering trail of light left by the fairies. The trees became denser, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead to block out the sky, and the air felt thick with magic. Every step Seraphina took seemed to echo in the eerie silence, and even Pippin, usually chattering away, remained unusually quiet. Seraphina clutched the dragon scale in her pocket, its weight grounding her as they ventured deeper into the unknown. The animals they passed along the way, deer with glowing eyes, owls that blinked in time with the flicker of the light trail, watched them with an unsettling intensity, as if they knew something she didn't. Are we close? Seraphina whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Pippin glanced up at her, his whiskers twitching. Close enough, I think. But remember, the guardian only appears when he chooses. We might not see him at all if he doesn't. A soft rustling ahead cut Pippin off, and they both froze. The glowing trail had led them to a clearing, one that seemed untouched by the chaos of the forest around it. The air here was still, almost reverent, and at the center stood a great oak tree, its roots spreading wide across the ground like the veins of the earth itself. Stay close, Pippin whispered, his eyes scanning the clearing. This must be the place. Seraphina stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding as she approached the oak tree. She could feel the magic here, like a hum beneath her skin. and something told her that the tree was far more than it seemed. The scale in her pocket grew warm, as though responding to the energy of the place. Suddenly, a deep voice rumbled through the clearing, ancient and powerful. "Who dares to disturb the silence of the forest?" Seraphina gasped, her eyes darting around in search of the speaker. But there was no one. Pippin's fur bristled as he took a step back. The voice rumbled again, this time coming from the oak tree itself. Its bark seemed to shimmer, and before Seraphina's eyes, the shape of a great stag emerged from the tree, its form both solid and spectral, as if it were made of the forest itself, the guardian of the forest. Seraphina could barely breathe as the towering figure of the stag turned its gaze upon her. Its eyes were ancient, filled with the wisdom of countless ages, and when it spoke again, its voice was like the groaning of trees in the wind. "You carry the dragon's scale," the guardian said, its gaze fixed on the shimmering object still in Seraphina's pocket. "Why have you come to me, child?" Seraphina swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she replied. "I found the scale by accident, but now I must return it. The animals say the balance of magic is tied to the dragon, and I need to find him." The guardian was silent for a moment, its antlers swaying slightly as though catching some invisible breeze. Finally, it spoke again. "The dragon has not been seen for many centuries. His disappearance left the forest vulnerable, and now you seek to restore the balance." Seraphina nodded, though she felt small under the weight of the guardian's gaze. "But I don't know where to find him. The fairies said you could help." At the mention of the fairies, the guardian's eyes darkened. "The fairies are not to be trusted, child. They weave truths and lies into the same thread. Still, their words hold some truth. I do know where the dragon once rested." Hope flickered in Seraphina's chest. "Can you tell me? Please." The guardian bowed its great head, the ground beneath it trembling slightly. "Far beyond this forest, past the mountains that pierce the sky, lies Dragon's Peak. It is there that the last of the dragons vanished into slumber, guarding a power that must never be unleashed." Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. "Dragon's Peak? How do I get there?" The guardian raised its head, its eyes gleaming with something akin to sorrow. "The journey is perilous. You will face many dangers, and the scale you carry will draw the attention of dark forces. Already a shadow stirs, seeking the scale for its own ends." "The Serpent of Shadows," Pippin muttered darkly, his tail twitching. The guardian nodded. "Yes. The serpent was sealed away by the dragon long ago, but it has sensed the scale's awakening and now seeks to claim its power. You must be swift, child. Return the scale before the serpent finds you." A cold shiver ran down Seraphina's spine. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the weight of the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. "But what if I can't do it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The guardian's gaze softened. "Courage does not come from knowing the path ahead. It comes from stepping forward despite the fear. The forest believes in you, as do the creatures who have placed their trust in you. You are stronger than you know." Seraphina felt something warm bloom in her chest, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do it. I'll return the scale." The guardian's form began to shimmer and fade, its voice a whisper as it spoke one last time. "Follow the stars, child. They will guide you to Dragon's Peak, and may the forest protect you." With that, the great stag vanished into the oak tree, leaving Seraphina and Pippin alone in the clearing once more. The trail of light had faded, but Seraphina no longer needed it. She had a direction now, and though the path ahead was dangerous, she knew she couldn't turn back. "We're going to Dragon's Peak," she said, turning to Pippin. "And we're going to find the dragon." Pippin nodded, though his eyes were filled with worry. "Then let's move quickly. The serpent won't be far behind." And so, with the Guardian's warning echoing in her mind, Seraphina stepped forward into the forest, her heart set on the distant mountains that waited beyond. The journey had truly begun. The day wore on as Seraphina and Pippin pressed deeper into the forest, the trees growing older and wilder with each step they took. The path, once clear, became tangled with roots and vines, as if the forest itself sought to slow their journey. The Guardian's words echoed in Seraphina's mind. "Follow the stars. They will guide you to Dragon's Peak." But the sky above was hidden, obscured by the canopy of leaves, and Seraphina could only guess at the direction they should take. "How far do you think it is?" she asked, glancing at Pippin, who scampered along beside her, his tail twitching with nervous energy. "Far," Pippin replied, his voice unusually quiet. "Dragon's Peak is beyond the mountains, and we haven't even reached them yet. We'll need to find shelter before nightfall." Seraphina nodded, though her heart sank at the thought of spending another night in the forest. She had always loved the woods near her village, but this part of the forest felt different, older, more mysterious, as though it held secrets that humans weren't meant to know. And now, with the weight of the dragon's scale pressing against her side, she felt those secrets pressing in on her too. As they walked, the forest grew even darker, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. The animals had gone silent again, watching from the shadows as the two travelers passed. Seraphina could feel their eyes on her, a constant reminder of the task she had been given. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent her heart racing, and she found herself gripping the scale in her pocket for comfort. Suddenly, Pippin froze, his ears twitching. Seraphina stopped beside him, her hand reaching instinctively for a branch that might serve as a weapon. "Something's coming," Pippin whispered, his voice tight with fear. Seraphina held her breath, listening. For a moment, there was only the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. But then she heard it, a low, rumbling growl, deep and menacing, coming from the underbrush ahead. Her heart leapt into her throat as the bushes parted, and out stepped a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It was a wolf, but not like the wolves she had heard about in stories. This one was enormous, its fur as dark as the night sky, and its eyes gleaming with a strange, unnatural light. It bared its teeth, a low snarl rumbling from its throat as it stalked toward them. Seraphina's breath caught in her chest. She knew she should run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. Pippin scurried behind her, trembling, and for a moment they were frozen in place, waiting for the wolf to strike. But then something strange happened. The wolf paused, its snarling fading as it tilted its head, as if listening to something only it could hear. Its glowing eyes locked onto Seraphina's, and she felt a strange warmth wash over her, the same warmth she had felt when she first touched the dragon's scale. Before she could say a word, the wolf spoke. "You carry the scale of the dragon." Seraphina's eyes widened in shock. The wolf's voice was deep, like the rumbling of thunder, but there was no malice in it, only curiosity. "Yes," Seraphina stammered, her hand instinctively tightening around the scale in her pocket. "I'm trying to return it. To the dragon." The wolf regarded her for a long moment, its eyes narrowing. "The dragon has not been seen in many lifetimes. Why do you seek him?" Seraphina swallowed hard, her fear giving way to determination. "Because the animals of the forest told me it's the only way to restore balance. I have to return the scale before something terrible happens." The wolf's ears twitched, and it seemed to consider her words. Then, with a slow nod, it lowered its head in what seemed almost like a gesture of respect. "You speak truth. The forest whispers of your journey, child. But beware. The serpent of shadows hunts you. It will not stop until it has taken the scale for itself." Seraphina's heart pounded in her chest. "The serpent? It's real." The wolf nodded again, its eyes dark with warning. "It is as old as the forest, as old as the dragon. It was bound by the dragon's magic long ago, but the scale's power has awakened it. You must be swift, for the serpent is close, and it will show no mercy." A cold chill ran down Seraphina's spine. She had feared the serpent since Pippin first mentioned it, but hearing the wolf's words made the danger feel all too real. "How do we stop it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You cannot defeat it alone," the wolf said, its gaze turning to the distant mountains beyond the trees. "Only the dragon can. But the journey is long, and the serpent grows stronger with each passing day. You must reach Dragon's Peak before it is too late." Seraphina nodded, her resolve hardening. "We'll make it. We have to." The wolf studied her for a moment longer, then turned away, its dark form melting back into the shadows of the forest. "May the strength of the forest guide you, child, but tread carefully. There are more dangers than just the serpent on your path." As the wolf disappeared into the night, Seraphina let out a shaky breath, her heart still racing. She turned to Pippin, who had remained silent throughout the encounter, his wide eyes filled with fear. "That was close," he muttered, his tail twitching nervously. "Too close." Seraphina nodded, her mind already racing ahead to what lay before them. "We need to keep moving. The serpent is coming." With renewed urgency, they set off once again, the path ahead dark and uncertain, but Seraphina's determination burning brighter than ever. The Guardian had given them the knowledge they needed, and now there was no turning back. Dragon's Peak awaited them, and with it, the fate of the forest. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged peaks rising like the teeth of a giant beast. Seraphina stared up at them, her breath catching in her throat. The journey had been long already, and the forest now lay behind them, its deep shadows and ancient magic replaced by the cold, biting wind of the mountain pass. The path before them was steep, rocky, and treacherous. It was a land where few dared to tread, a place where even the bravest creatures of the forest kept their distance. Seraphina pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, shivering against the chill. The weight of the dragon's scale in her pocket felt heavier with each step, as though it too sensed the danger ahead. Pippin, ever her companion, scampered alongside her, his usual chatter reduced to quiet mutterings, as he too felt the ominous presence of the mountains. "This place feels wrong," Pippin murmured, his fur bristling as they made their way along a narrow ledge. "The air is thick with old magic, dark magic." Seraphina nodded, her eyes scanning the craggy landscape for any signs of movement. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying with it whispers she could almost, but not quite, understand. It was as if the very stones beneath their feet were alive, waiting, watching. Still, they pressed on, knowing that the only way to reach Dragon's Peak was to cross this perilous range. Each step took them higher, the air growing thinner, the wind colder. Time seemed to stretch, and Seraphina could no longer tell if hours or days had passed. All she knew was the steady rhythm of her feet against the stone, the sharp sting of the wind on her face, and the constant unnerving feeling that they were being watched. As they reached a plateau, Seraphina paused to catch her breath, her legs trembling from the climb. She looked out across the expanse of mountains, their peaks disappearing into the misty clouds above. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant cry of an eagle. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a howl echoed through the mountains. But this was not the howl of a wolf or any other creature Seraphina recognized. It was deep, guttural, and filled with malice. Pippin's ears flattened against his head, and he pressed closer to Seraphina, his small body trembling. That wasn't natural, Pippin whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. Seraphina's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard tales of mountain spirits, creatures born from the very rocks and ice. But none of those stories had prepared her for the feeling of dread that now settled over her. She tightened her grip on the dragon's scale, the warmth of its magic a small comfort against the cold fear creeping into her bones. "We have to keep going," Seraphina said, though her voice shook. "We're close now. Dragon's Peak can't be far." Pippin nodded, but his eyes were wide with fear. Still, he followed as Seraphina led the way forward, their path narrowing once again as they wound their way higher into the mountains. As they rounded a bend, the air suddenly grew still, the wind dying down to an eerie silence. Seraphina slowed her pace, her instincts telling her something was wrong. She looked up and froze. Standing in the middle of the path ahead was a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It was massive, its body covered in thick fur that shimmered in the pale light. Its eyes, a deep, glowing yellow, fixed on Seraphina with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. But it wasn't just the creature's size that terrified her. It was the unmistakable aura of magic that radiated from it, dark and twisted. "A mountain guardian," Pippin whispered, his voice trembling. "I've heard of them. They're ancient, and not to be trifled with." The guardian stepped forward, its massive paws crunching the snow beneath them. It bared its teeth, a low growl rumbling from its chest. Seraphina's heart raced, but she stood her ground, her hand instinctively reaching for the dragon's scale in her pocket. "We mean no harm," Seraphina called out, her voice steady despite her fear. "We're just passing through. We need to reach Dragon's Peak." The guardian tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Dragon's Peak is forbidden," it growled, its voice like the grinding of stones. "Turn back, or face the mountain's wrath." Seraphina swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She knew there was no turning back, not now. The fate of the forest, and perhaps the entire realm, rested on her reaching the dragon. But the guardian's presence was a reminder that this journey would not be easy. "I can't turn back," Seraphina said, her voice firm. "The dragon's scale must be returned. If I fail, the serpent of shadows will rise again." At the mention of the serpent, the guardian's growl faltered, its eyes flickering with a brief flash of recognition. It stepped closer, its towering form casting a long shadow over Seraphina and Pippin. "The serpent!" it rumbled, its voice low and dangerous. "It seeks the scale, does it not?" Seraphina nodded. Yes, it's already hunting us. We need to reach the dragon before it finds us. For a long moment, the guardian was silent, its glowing eyes locked on the scale in Seraphina's hand. Then, with a slow nod, it stepped aside, its massive body shifting to reveal the path beyond. "Go," the guardian said, its voice a low rumble. "But beware. The serpent is close, and the mountain will not be kind." Seraphina exhaled, relief flooding through her as she bowed her head in thanks. Without another word, she and Pippin hurried past the guardian, their path now clear. But as they ventured deeper into the mountains, Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The serpent was close, too close, and she knew they would have to face it soon. The climb continued, the air growing colder and thinner, but Seraphina's resolve remained unshaken. She had come too far to turn back now. Dragon's Peak awaited, and with it, the answers to the mysteries that had haunted her since the day she found the scale. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the jagged peaks as Seraphina and Pippin pressed onward, their breaths coming in short, frosty puffs. The air had grown colder, more biting, the kind of cold that cut through to the bone. The higher they climbed, the more the weight of the dragon's scale seemed to grow, as though it too sensed the impending danger. Pippin, ever watchful, kept glancing over his shoulder, his whiskers twitching with nervous energy. "It's too quiet," he muttered. "I don't like it." Seraphina felt the same. The silence of the mountains was oppressive, as if even the wind had grown wary of disturbing the peace. The stillness was unnatural, heavy, and it only served to remind her that something terrible was lurking just beyond the edge of her awareness. They had come far, crossing treacherous ledges and steep inclines, but Dragon's Peak still seemed distant, veiled in the mist that clung to the highest summits. And with every step, Seraphina could feel the serpent drawing closer. It was as though the very air crackled with the dark energy of its pursuit, a looming threat that sent chills down her spine. "We have to keep moving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's coming." Pippin gave her a sharp nod, his small form hurrying to keep pace. "I can feel it too. The serpent's near." As they rounded a sharp bend in the mountain path, the ground suddenly gave way beneath Seraphina's feet. She stumbled, her arms flailing as she tried to catch her balance, but the loose rocks and gravel slid beneath her boots, sending her careening toward the edge of the cliff. "Seraphina!" Pippin squeaked, rushing to her side. She reached out, her fingers scraping against the rough stone, and at the last moment, she managed to grab hold of a jagged rock, pulling herself back from the brink. Her heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline surging through her veins as she fought to steady her breathing. "That was close," she muttered, wiping the cold sweat from her brow. But just as she regained her footing, a low hiss echoed through the air, a sound that made her blood run cold. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest as the hiss grew louder, reverberating through the mountains like the whisper of death itself. Pippin's eyes widened in terror. "It's here." Seraphina turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she saw it. Slithering through the shadows, a massive serpentine figure winding its way toward them. The Serpent of Shadows. Its scales were black as night, gleaming with an unnatural light, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent hunger. The very air around it seemed to darken, as though it sucked the light from the world with every movement. The serpent reared its head, its forked tongue flickering out as it tasted the air, and then its gaze locked on Seraphina. "The scale!" it hissed. its voice a low, rasping sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Give it to me, child." Seraphina took a step back, her hand instinctively tightening around the dragon's scale in her pocket. "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You can't have it." The serpent's eyes narrowed, and a low, rumbling growl echoed from deep within its throat. "Foolish girl," it spat. "You cannot hope to stand against me. The power of the scale belongs to me. Return it, and I may spare your life." Seraphina's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "The scale isn't yours. It belongs to the dragon, and I'm going to return it." The serpent's mouth twisted into a cruel smile, revealing rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. "The dragon is gone," it sneered. "I will take what is mine, and with it I will plunge this world into darkness." With a sudden, lightning-fast strike, the serpent lunged at her, its massive body coiling through the air. Seraphina barely had time to react, throwing herself to the side as the serpent's jaws snapped shut just inches from where she had stood. "Run!" Pippin squeaked, his voice high with panic. Seraphina scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest as she sprinted down the narrow path, the serpent's furious hisses echoing behind her. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, the rocks loose and unstable, but she pushed forward, driven by the desperate need to escape. The serpent was fast, far faster than she had expected. Its enormous body snaked through the air, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Seraphina could feel the cold, dark magic radiating from it, a malevolent force that made the air heavy and difficult to breathe. Up ahead, the path narrowed even further, leading into a tunnel carved into the mountainside. Without thinking, Seraphina darted inside, her feet pounding against the stone as she plunged into the darkness. The serpent's hisses followed her, growing louder and more frenzied as it pursued her into the tunnel. The passageway was tight, barely wide enough for the serpent's massive body to fit, and Seraphina could hear the sound of it scraping against the stone walls as it slithered after her. But the tunnel twisted and turned, a labyrinth of passages that seemed to stretch on forever. "Keep going!" Pippin urged, darting ahead to scout the way. Seraphina's lungs burned, her muscles screaming in protest, but she forced herself to keep running. The tunnel twisted again, and just as she was beginning to lose hope, she saw it. Light. A faint flickering glow at the end of the passageway. With a final burst of energy, Seraphina sprinted toward the light, her heart pounding in her ears. The serpent was still behind her, but as she burst out of the tunnel and into the open air, she felt a surge of relief. They had escaped, at least for now. Seraphina collapsed onto the rocky ground, gasping for breath, her heart racing with the realization of how close they had come to being caught. The serpent's hisses still echoed faintly from the tunnel, but it could not follow them here, not yet. Pippin skittered to her side, his wide eyes filled with concern. "That was too close." Seraphina nodded, still catching her breath. "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice hoarse. "The serpent won't stop. We have to reach the dragon." And with that, they set off once more, the shadow of the serpent still looming behind them, and Dragon's Peak drawing ever closer in the distance. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, casting a pale glow on the jagged peaks of Dragon's Peak. Seraphina and Pippin had barely stopped since their narrow escape from the serpent, their legs heavy with exhaustion. Yet the sight of the distant summit filled Seraphina with a renewed sense of hope. The path ahead was steep and treacherous, but Dragon's Peak was close now, so close that Seraphina could almost feel the ancient magic pulsing in the air. The trail wound upward, narrow and slick with frost, and each step took all the strength Seraphina had left. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts, and her body ached from the relentless climb, but she kept moving. The dragon's scale weighed heavily in her pocket, its warmth steady against her side, reminding her of the importance of her journey. "We're almost there," Pippin said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. His little paws scrambled over the rocks as he led the way, ever watchful of the dangers lurking in the shadows. The summit of Dragon's Peak loomed above them, an enormous craggy cliff face that jutted out over the world like a throne of stone. At the very top, nestled in the heart of the mountain, was a cave, dark and ancient, its entrance shrouded in mist. Seraphina hesitated as she reached the base of the cliff. This was it. Beyond that cave lay the dragon she had come so far to find, but as she stood there, the weight of the journey pressed down on her, and doubt began to creep in. "What if the dragon doesn't wake?" she whispered, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since they'd started. "What if we're too late?" Pippin hopped onto a nearby rock, his sharp eyes locking with hers. "We won't know unless we try. You've come this far, Seraphina. Don't lose hope now." Seraphina nodded, though her heart still fluttered with uncertainty. She glanced up at the cave again, then steeled herself. The serpent of shadows was still out there, hunting them, growing stronger with every moment they delayed. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Together, Seraphina and Pippin climbed the last stretch of the mountain, the wind howling around them as they ascended the narrow path leading to the cave. The mist thickened as they approached, swirling around the entrance like a veil of mystery. Seraphina stepped inside the cave, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with the scent of ancient magic. The cave itself was vast, its ceiling disappearing into shadow, and at its center, lying motionless on a bed of rock, was the dragon. Seraphina gasped. The creature was enormous, its shimmering golden scales reflecting the dim light of the cave like jewels. Its wings were folded against its massive body, and its long tail curled around itself in a protective loop. It looked ancient, far older than anything Seraphina had ever seen, and for a moment she was awestruck by its sheer presence. But the dragon didn't move. Its eyes remained closed, its chest still. Seraphina's heart sank. She had come all this way, but the dragon remained asleep, locked in a slumber that had lasted for centuries. "Is it too late?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Pippin stepped forward, his small form dwarfed by the dragon's immense size. "It can't be. The scale. Give the scale to the dragon." Seraphina nodded, her fingers shaking as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the dragon's scale. It glowed softly in her hand, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold air of the cave. She approached the dragon, her heart pounding, and placed the scale on the stone beside its head. For a moment, nothing happened. The cave remained silent, the dragon motionless. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. But then, slowly, the scale began to glow brighter. A soft hum filled the air, and the warmth from the scale spread through the cave like a rising tide. The dragon stirred. Seraphina stepped back, her eyes wide as she watched the creature's eyelids flutter. A deep rumbling sound echoed from its chest, and its great golden eyes opened. They were ancient and wise, filled with the knowledge of countless ages. And as they fixed on Seraphina, she felt a surge of energy pulse through her. The dragon lifted its head, its gaze settling on the scale that lay beside it. It inhaled deeply, as if drawing in the magic that had long been dormant. And then it spoke, its voice a deep, resonant rumble that filled the cave. "You have returned the scale," the dragon said, its eyes gleaming with something like gratitude. "After all these centuries." Seraphina swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "The serpent of shadows has awakened. It's hunting us. It wants the scale." The dragon's eyes darkened at the mention of the serpent. "The serpent was bound by my magic long ago, but with the scale removed, its power has returned. I can feel it in the air, the darkness it brings." Seraphina's heart raced. "Can you stop it? Can you stop the serpent before it's too late?" The dragon regarded her for a long moment, its gaze heavy with the weight of its ancient knowledge. "I can," it rumbled. "But the serpent is powerful, and the balance of magic is fragile. You, child, have played a role in awakening me. The scale has chosen you, and now you must aid in restoring what was broken." Seraphina blinked, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "But I'm just a girl. What can I do?" The dragon's golden eyes softened, and it leaned forward, its massive head bowing low before her. "Courage is not measured by size or strength, but by heart. You have come this far because of your courage. Trust in it." Seraphina's breath caught in her throat, but she nodded, her resolve strengthening. She had come too far to turn back now. The dragon was awake, and together they would face the darkness. Outside, the sky darkened, and the wind howled as the serpent drew closer. But Seraphina stood tall, her hand resting on the dragon's scale, her heart burning with the fire of determination. The final battle was near. The sky above Dragon's Peak had darkened, swirling with clouds that crackled with a storm's fury. Seraphina stood at the entrance of the cave, the wind tearing at her cloak as the ground trembled beneath her feet. The serpent of shadows was drawing closer, its presence a suffocating weight on the mountain. From the depths of the cave, the dragon emerged, its massive wings unfurling, casting a long shadow over the rocky terrain. The dragon was awake, its golden eyes burning with ancient power, and yet Seraphina could feel the tension in the air. The serpent was no ordinary foe. It was a creature born of darkness, one that had waited centuries to reclaim its dominion over the world. Now it slithered up the mountainside, the ground quaking with each coil of its massive body. Pippin, who had been silent for some time, tugged at Seraphina's sleeve, his eyes wide with fear. "It's coming. We don't have much time." Seraphina glanced down at him, her heart pounding. "I know, but we have the dragon now. We can stop it." The dragon, hearing her words, turned its great head toward her. "The serpent is strong, child. Its hunger for the scale will drive it to madness. But together, we may yet defeat it. Hold your courage, for the battle will be fierce." Seraphina nodded, her grip tightening around the dragon's scale. The warmth of the scale radiated through her, filling her with a sense of purpose. She had come this far, survived dangers she'd never imagined, and now she stood at the edge of the most dangerous moment yet. But she wasn't alone. The dragon, Pippin, and the magic of the forest were with her. A bone-chilling hiss echoed through the air, and Seraphina's breath caught as the serpent's dark form emerged from the mist below. Its body twisted through the rocks, massive and menacing, its black scales shimmering with an unnatural light. Its eyes, cold, gleaming slits, locked onto Seraphina with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "Give me the scale!" the serpent hissed, its voice a low, rasping snarl that reverberated across the mountain. "It belongs to me!" Seraphina took a step back, her heart racing, but the dragon moved forward, placing itself between her and the serpent. "The scale belongs to no one but the dragon," it rumbled, its wings flaring as it took its battle stance. "Your darkness will not prevail here." The serpent's eyes flashed with rage, and with a sudden terrifying speed, it lunged toward them, its jaws wide, teeth gleaming like knives. Seraphina gasped, ducking just in time as the serpent's head shot past her, striking the ground with a force that sent shards of rock flying in all directions. The dragon let out a deafening roar and took to the sky, its powerful wings lifting it above the battlefield. With a mighty sweep of its tail, it knocked the serpent back, sending it crashing into the mountainside. But the serpent was relentless, rising from the rubble with a snarl, its body coiling as it prepared to strike again. Seraphina's heart raced as she watched the two titanic creatures clash, the air filled with the sound of snapping jaws, flapping wings, and the roar of unleashed magic. The mountain itself seemed to tremble under the weight of their battle. Every time the dragon unleashed a burst of golden fire, the serpent countered with a wave of dark magic, twisting the very air into a suffocating fog of shadow. Pippin scurried to Seraphina's side, his small form shaking as he spoke. "The dragon's holding its own, but the serpent's too strong. We need to do something, or it'll overpower the dragon." Seraphina's mind raced. She knew Pippin was right. The dragon was powerful, but the serpent's darkness was growing with every strike, fueled by its relentless hunger for the scale. Seraphina reached into her pocket and pulled out the dragon's scale. Its warmth was a steady pulse against her palm, a reminder of the magic she carried. Then it struck her. The scale wasn't just a token to be returned. It held the dragon's power, the very balance of magic that had once sealed the serpent away. If she could tap into that magic, if she could use it alongside the dragon's strength, they might stand a chance. Seraphina turned to Pippin, her eyes wide with determination. "The scale, it's more than just a symbol. It holds the dragon's magic. If I can channel it, maybe we can defeat the serpent together." Pippin's eyes widened, but he nodded quickly. "Then do it, before it's too late." With a deep breath, Seraphina stepped forward, the scale clutched tightly in her hand. She could feel the magic humming through her, a warm, golden light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Closing her eyes, she focused on the connection she felt with the dragon, the ancient bond that had been forged the moment she had found the scale. "Dragon!" she called, her voice steady and clear. "Take the power of the scale! Use it to stop the serpent!" The dragon, locked in battle with the serpent, heard her call. Its golden eyes flickered with understanding, and it turned its great head toward her, a soft glow of light gathering around its massive form. The scale in Seraphina's hand began to glow brighter, and she could feel the dragon's power flowing through her, merging with her own. The serpent lunged again, its fangs bared, but this time the dragon was ready. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain, the dragon unleashed a blast of golden fire, fueled by the magic of the scale. The light was blinding, a brilliant, searing force that cut through the darkness like a blade. The serpent screamed, its body writhing as the light engulfed it. The darkness that had surrounded it began to fade, the shadows peeling away like smoke in the wind. The serpent thrashed, its form shrinking, until finally, with one last furious hiss, it was consumed by the light, and then it was gone. Seraphina fell to her knees, gasping for breath as the magic ebbed from her body. The scale dimmed in her hand, its glow fading as the battle came to an end. The dragon landed beside her, its massive wings folding against its back. Its eyes, no longer burning with the intensity of battle, softened as it looked down at her. "You did well, child," the dragon rumbled, its voice gentle. "The serpent is defeated. The balance is restored." Seraphina smiled weakly, her heart filled with relief and gratitude. The long, arduous journey had reached its end, and though she was exhausted, she knew that the peace they had fought for was worth every step. The dragon, its great form glowing in the light of the rising sun, bowed its head to her. "The scale will remain with me now, as it was meant to, but you, Seraphina, will be remembered as the one who restored the balance." Seraphina nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She had faced the darkness and won, not alone, but with the strength of the forest and the creatures who believed in her. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the mist, painting the peaks of the mountains in hues of gold and rose. The air was still now, the storm that had once churned over Dragon's Peak replaced by an overwhelming sense of calm. Seraphina stood at the edge of the summit, looking down at the world below with a mixture of awe and relief. The battle was over, and the Serpent of Shadows was no more. Beside her, the dragon, its golden scales shimmering in the morning light, lowered its head, allowing Seraphina to rest her hand against its broad, warm muzzle. There was a sense of quiet understanding between them, a bond forged through their shared journey. Seraphina could feel the power of the dragon's magic settling back into balance. The same magic that had once been threatened by darkness. "You've done more than I could have hoped for," the dragon rumbled, its voice soft now, filled with gratitude. "The serpent is gone, and the forest will know peace once again." Seraphina smiled, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. "I didn't do it alone. Without you, without the animals, I wouldn't have made it this far." Pippin, who had been quietly perched on a nearby rock, gave a proud little chirp. "It was a team effort," he said, puffing out his chest. "But you, Seraphina, you're the one who carried the scale. You were chosen." Seraphina glanced down at the dragon's scale, still warm in her hand, but no longer glowing with the fierce light of battle. It felt lighter now, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. The magic within it had returned to the dragon, and the weight of responsibility that had once burdened Seraphina had lifted, leaving her with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The dragon shifted its gaze to the horizon, where the forest stretched out below them like a vast, living sea. "The balance has been restored," it said, its voice filled with reverence. "But this is only the beginning. The world is always changing, and there will be new challenges ahead. Yet I know the forest, and all who dwell within it, are in good hands." Seraphina followed the dragon's gaze, her heart swelling with a sense of peace she hadn't felt since her journey began. She had set out as a girl from a small village, unsure of her place in the world, but now she felt stronger, wiser. She had learned the language of the animals, uncovered the secrets of the enchanted forest, and faced down a darkness that had threatened everything she loved. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft. The dragon turned its golden eyes toward her, filled with an ancient wisdom. "Now you return home. The forest will always welcome you, and the magic of the scale will remain within you. You are a part of its story now, Seraphina, a guardian of its peace." Seraphina nodded, feeling the truth of the dragon's words resonate within her. She would return to her village, but she would never be the same. She had seen too much, learned too much, to go back to her old life as it was. And yet, that wasn't something that frightened her anymore. She had grown beyond the borders of what she once knew, and the world felt vast and full of possibility. Pippin hopped onto her shoulder, his bright eyes gleaming. "I guess this is goodbye then," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "You'll be going back to your village, and I'll stay here in the forest." Seraphina smiled, reaching up to scratch him behind his ears. "It's not goodbye, Pippin. I'll come back and visit. The forest is part of me now, just like you." Pippin blinked up at her, his whiskers twitching, and for a moment, his bravado faded, replaced by a soft, almost wistful expression. "You'd better," he muttered. "The forest won't be the same without you." With a final glance at the dragon, who watched them with a quiet, knowing gaze, Seraphina turned toward the path that wound down the mountain. The journey ahead felt lighter now, as if the mountain itself had released her from its grasp, no longer the ominous, shadowed place it had once been. As they descended, Seraphina felt the warmth of the sun on her face, and she knew the forest had already begun to heal. The animals would sing again, the trees would whisper their ancient secrets, and peace would return to the land. And though the dragon's scale would remain on Dragon's Peak, its magic would live on in the heart of the forest, and in Seraphina. When they reached the base of the mountain, the familiar sound of the forest greeted them. The birds chirped, the wind rustled the leaves, and the hum of life returned in full force. Seraphina smiled, feeling the magic in the air, knowing it would always be there, a constant presence in the background of her life. As the village came into view, Seraphina's heart swelled with the thought of returning home. But this time, she wasn't returning as the same girl who had left. She was different now, stronger, wiser, and filled with a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had played a part in saving something far greater than herself. With Pippin by her side and the forest's magic within her, Seraphina stepped onto the familiar path that led back to the village. The adventure that had begun with a dragon scale had come to an end. But as she looked ahead, she knew that a new journey was waiting for her. And in the heart of the forest, beneath the golden glow of the morning sun, the dragon watched, its great wings folded, a silent guardian over the world it had sworn to protect.